Hi friends, welcome to the Musician's Musician and happy 2025. My name is Nick Costa, and for our first episode of this new year, we have a very, very special guest. Richard Edwards is an incredible songwriter who you might know from his amazing string of solo albums under his own name, or maybe you know his previous iconic band, Margot and the Nuclear So-and-Sos. I tell the story about how I discovered Margot in this podcast, so I won't give away any spoilers, but Richard's songwriting has been incredibly formative for me. I've often said that my three favorite albums of all time are Ram by Paul and Linda McCartney, Red-Headed Stranger by Willie Nelson, and Slingshot to Heaven by Margot and the Nuclear So-and-Sos. Richard has been battling some health issues ever since the Slingshot album came out, which makes his ability to perform live nearly non-existent. He had been having a bit of a flare recently, as well as possibly a bout of COVID. So while he did agree to chat with me, we weren't sure exactly when he'd feel well enough to do that. He said it's pretty unpredictable which nights he feels well or doesn't. One day last week, he messaged me saying, "I'm feeling good tonight. Does 10 minutes from now work for you?" So Charlie, my partner, and I scrambled to feed the dog and get everything set up for what ended up being a really lovely chat about the incredible artist Cut Worms, somebody whose work that Richard had turned me onto in the past. I'm beyond thrilled to have such a phenomenal artist join me for the first guest of the year, so let's get into it. Well, I am here with Richard Edwards. Richard, thank you so much for being a musician's musician.
Hey, what can I say? It's an honor.
We are going to get into a really fantastic album. But before we get into that, I know that you're taking a break from doing music. Is that accurate, or are you just kind of going wherever the wind takes you as far as creative projects go?
Well, a break has sort of been imposed upon me for several reasons. One, I've made too many records in the last few years, and it's expensive to do that.
Amen.
It's not very easy to write songs right now, just because of what's happening with I have a long-standing kind of upper abdominal sort of GI pain situation, which is putting it pretty mildly. But as you know, songwriting is like repetition of doing something that's very painful to do right now. So it sucks. It's kind of the first time in my life I'm not writing songs. And, there's all sorts of factors why that might be, but not least of which is just, it's kind of painful to do the work that it takes to make them the way I want them to be, or the way that I feel acceptable.
Sure. Yeah. And, if anything I've noticed from the past is that you hold yourself to a pretty high standard when it comes to your music.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a standard. I don't know if it's high, but it's very specific.
Yeah.
So it's a very specific standard. High is all in the definition of he who is proclaiming as such. But you say hi, I appreciate it. I'll take it.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And I think I was a little surprised to see you kind of crank out the King of the Spookworkers record too, because like you did that in like a week. Like you decided to do it and then it was done.
Well, I was just for in the sake of, I was really despite my reputation, I'm not like an overly depressed person. I was deep in it that week, like almost ideation kind of depression. And so I think I thought about doing something like that for a long time. And I'm blessed to work with this guy, Dave Palmer, who's a piano player in Ojai, now LA to Ojai to back to LA. But we have a relationship that's sort of similar to my other friend, Mike Bloom, where sometimes the friendship kind of steps in and they say, like, I think you should make a record this week instead of thinking about what you seem to be. So that's kind of what we did. I gave him, it was kind of cool and neat to do it that way, because I didn't have to overthink like the song choices. I just kind of gave him some stuff that was inspiring to me or moving, a big mixture of stuff, as you know, of like really modern and like almost persuaded, these songs I'm in love with, like standards that I'm finding not everybody shares my enthusiasm for them, but yeah, it was kind of beautiful. It was like going back to do Rock Gut or something. It was like just like wham, bam, bam, bam. Don't overthink it too much. You know, you have Stella Mozgawa and they're drumming, and that's incredible to hear. You don't need much. It's like you got Dave and Stella and me. Like it's kind of fine, you know. Like,
yeah, for sure. Was that the process for Rock Gut? It was just like fast and
oh
easy?
yeah, Rock Gut was in like 8 or 9 days.
Wow.
And that was, you know, that was coming off of, even Buzzard took forever. Like we were making records that took a long time. And Connelton, this guy we did it with, for reasons of finance, but I think also we've always challenged ourselves in weird ways. Like that Slingshot, we didn't have any computers in the room. Rocka, it was like that. It was like, oh, if he's got this time open, it would be a good experiment to see if you fail or succeed, you know, like,
sure.
I mean, half the songs I brought in didn't go anywhere. Didn't have a chorus yet. And I'd write a lot of that record while people were having smoke breaks and stuff. And so it was really cool. I mean, I wouldn't want to do it. I prefer the other way, but it is good to do something like that and realize like I have the ability to do this, you know?
Yeah.
And by doing it, it's a much different record because it's so much off the like quick instinct rather than like something like Softic, which is the furthest end of the other spectrum, which is like working on every little melodic phrase for weeks and months, and you know, and I think stuff is better for me when I do it that way, but it's different when you do it fast, and so it's good to do it that way sometimes. Yeah,
I think there's something to be said for really both angles, you know, like
you got to. Yeah,
there's something beautiful about like first idea is best idea, but also like
it's all there, right?
Yeah, if that were always the case, then like we wouldn't have Pet Sounds or.
Yeah, I learned the lesson of my English. I think I've said it before. My English teachers, the revision process. You know, I do wish so much I'd done that earlier in life, because for me, my stuff does get better when I do it that way. But I like having these few that are these like weird outliers of wham bam sort of mania, because I mean, I like, you know, I talk about film more than I talk about music, but I love directors who they've got those 4-hour ones and they've got that little 90-minute one that, you know, is like just this little weekend idea, you know?
Yeah.
It's cool. It's what a body of work's all about, you know? I mean,
yeah, for sure.
Talking about it has a similar sort of body of work where I can see all his changes and ideas and everything.
Definitely. Yeah. And I feel like that's a pretty good segue to get into it. We are going to talk about Cutworms, and we're going to focus a little bit on the album Nobody Lives Here Anymore, which is brilliant. But before we kind of dive into that album specifically, do you remember like the first time that you heard Cutworms?
I very much remember like the situation of hearing that guy for the first time. And it was because strangely it seemed to have a similar trajectory where like maybe it took him longer to start making like records that he wanted, but I was hearing things from him that were like demos that just weird pop heads had. Like friends of mine who I think were friends of his. I don't know Max. I get the impression he's a couple years younger than me at least, but not too far off. But I know a friend, Jacob Gardner. He's the one I can remember the most. Maybe I don't want to out the people who are leaking Max's demos, but he was just, I kind of was like that when I was little. I had demos and people that like pop music would kind of be like, this fucking little kid's doing something cool. I was sort of traded around or passed around in that way. And so I was probably more inclined to listen to it because someone I respected was like this little kid in Ohio or wherever he was from. Not a little kid. Again, he's not far off.
He's a grown man.
I think of him that way because I think about like a kid's demo or something. You know?
Yeah.
And I loved it. I thought he was the top of the pops. You know, it reminded me of there's always like one or two really great people like that when you're young. They're like, oh, that's the motherfucker that liked Brian Wilson. That's the motherfucker that like. And it's cool to hear one of them, you know?
Yeah.
Don't always. I'm older now, so I don't hear these kids the same way. I mean, he might be the last one that a friend was just handing me demo tapes of this. You know, this kid kind of reminds me of like how you used to do this stuff.
Yeah.
So that's how I first heard it. And I know I had those tapes on my computer. It's not something I wasn't obsessed over it at that point or anything. I didn't really become obsessed by it until this record that we're talking about. But I had so much admiration for it and respect for it. Like, you just noticing someone that, oh, this dude sees melody, holds melody to the same esteem that I do or something, like,
Yeah, sure.
we both must have been kids who were so moved by melody and so inspired by melody. And of everything I do, I think about it, it's always melody is the top thing of the love part of what I do. And so whenever you hear somebody like that, you feel not super alone, even though it's not like what he and I are doing or that similar. But from a school of like a tradition of melody, I think that there's some kindred stuff there probably.
Yeah. And, we were kind of talking about the songs that you chose for King of the Spookworkers, and like there's like Almost Persuaded, I think you brought up, where
song.
like, yeah, and like No Other Love is another one where like I feel like Max's writing, as far as melodies go, it does feel like that kind of like late 50s, early 60s,
Absolutely.
like almost
And
Buddy
that's
Holly.
very different. I mean, I love singing those songs and listening to those songs, and I think I do an okay job singing them on this record. I don't really write that way,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I'd write a little closer to Almost Persuaded, certainly, than No Other Love, but that's based on Chopin, so it's like I would know how to begin like writing a song like that. And maybe Max wouldn't either. Chopin. But yeah, I love that stuff. I'm obsessed with it. And the thing about him, the one thing I wanted to kind of mention off the top of this conversation was I get real defendy about things I love. So like, I know he's on like a real label now. And so when that last record came out, I was seeing advertisements for it on Facebook, whatever. Which was cool because it's like so rarely are you targeted like, oh, this is exactly what I want to know about,
Yeah.
But it's being targeted on Facebook to like a whole age range of people who don't at all want it to about it. And so there's a string of comments like, that same like, why don't you put this kid in a seersucker suit and send him back to, I saw this back in the 50s. And you want to tell these idiots like, that's such a valid like first thing to think when you hear someone like Max. I don't want to keep calling him by his first name. I don't know him. I'll call him Mr. Clark.
Yeah.
But you spend 5 minutes with it and you realize it's Gillian David. Like,
yeah,
he could have been alive at any time. This is part of this kid's spirit that exists. It's not bullshit. We all absorb energy from the past. We all project energy, that will happen in the future. Something in that dude came from then, something in Gillian came from then. She's not put it on. There's something in her that if you cut her up against some Appalachian woman doing those songs in the 20s, enough matches if you got the right scientific tools that it makes sense. 100%. And so Max's stuff is like that for me. It's like, I'm in no way, I don't find it to be an affectation. I'm not off put by anything about it stylistically because nobody sounds like him. He sounds like the idea of a time. He doesn't sound like anybody from that time. When I hear the band ripping off Led Zeppelin, they're ripping off Zeppelin.
Yeah.
Max Clark, he's just emblematic of a period of time and an idea about music, much more than you could ever pinpoint. I mean, I thought it was cute that kids were calling him the fifth Beatle, but it's so accurate. It's like, he's not any of, there's times where he sounds a little bit like George Harrison for sure.
It's very much got
he's got a little George in him. Yeah. But he's called the fifth one because he doesn't sound like any of them. He's emblematic of an idea about music and a feeling and certainly a time. And it works completely for me, and I think for people it doesn't work for, I don't trust those people, or I think they're not coming at it in good faith or something.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Because, I mean, and maybe those people had been hurt by like the stomp clap, like, hey ho stuff from like the early 2000s. Like,
I got accused of being the Fugazi on the other. No! We didn't do stomping clapping, but I think there's some truth to the fact that we were probably early on that downstrummy thing. But
yeah, I mean, I feel I wouldn't put you guys on that, but I mean,
he said it in a cute way.
That is funny. I mean, if you count as tall as Cliff's, but
I guess. But that's even like I isolated those tracks like an idiot the other day, and that's like rock being thrown at window. Like
yeah, that's very different. It's very
violence, and it wasn't very communal. It was like isolating violent sounds and then making them more harmonic.
Yeah, there's something also, and kind of just circling back to kind of what you were saying, but like that is like a very genuine artistic choice instead of like trying to be something that like doesn't really belong there because it's a trend, right?
And you're talking about his decision to sort of be a product of the past or be
right, like
informed by the past more than he's informed by like whatever's happening in modernity at the moment. Right.
Like, this album sounds like it was produced by like unfortunately sounds like it was produced by Phil Spector or something like that. But like it has that All Things Must Pass production style.
Second one?
Yeah. The
maybe like the vocal effects, but I don't see it as like, I see it as such a record so committed to being minimal in a way that I don't associate with Phil Spector or somebody.
I mean, more in like the way that reverb and like
totally, yeah, for sure.
It sounds very warm and like there's
real cavernous in a cool, like echoey way.
In a really cool way, but it sounds kind of to me like if Buddy Holly were to like make a George Harrison record or something like that, which like, and that's just like throwing.
Buddy Holly was making Nebraska,
Yeah, like for sure.
More reverb.
Yeah, exactly. So there's like, and you can listen to any song on that album and be like, oh, this kind of sounds like this, but not quite.
But none of it does. Like none of it does. It all holds up to scrutiny in a way that's like so rare. There's nothing about it that's pastiche, despite where it's planting its flag, and I find that so admirable. And that's why I feel like anybody that has that knee-jerk reaction of anybody, Cutworms, spending 2 minutes with them would make you feel really foolish. Like I've been disavowed of certain initial perceptions of something that's taken a long time. 2 years later, I see this film a whole new way or something. With Cutworms, you either get it within the first 2 minutes and you're correct, or spend the rest of your lifetime and you're just incorrect. I don't know. That's where I stand on it.
No, I think that's very valid. Because I remember this one came out in 2020.
I was looking at that, yeah.
And
seems recent, doesn't it?
It seems a lot more recent than almost 5 years ago at this point.
Pandemic shit, because that's when I was doing Soft Take, so all that feels like this weird, like George Floyd and pandemic and everything.
Yeah. I was living in Los Angeles for the first time when this album came out, and I remember you were doing Soft Ache, and that was like a soundtrack to like that part of the year for me, like finally receiving vitamin D naturally in a way for the first time in my life after living in the Midwest for a long time, and like that record came out, and then you were posting about this Cutworms record like all the time.
Oh, good. I'm glad I was doing that.
Yeah, and then I was like, well, I should probably listen to it, and I put it on, and it was like instant, like, yep.
But did you feel it was too long the first time you heard it?
I did.
See, because I wonder if I did too, and now I feel like its length is such a part of what's so brilliant about it. I'm finding stuff 4 years later on that record that anyway, but you felt it was I'm interested in that first reaction.
Yeah, it was like, this is really good, but it's like,
it's so long.
I feel like we are kind of, and like I am very, very guilty of this, of being like, a record should be 10 songs and 45 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, I usually am too, yeah.
But this one, and I kind of did feel that way when this came out, but it was just really good. And I just kept finding myself kind of picking up where I left off, like I was reading.
Did you find yourself drifting to different sections of it? Because that's what I found is like this year alone, the back half of it started blowing my mind in a way where it's like, I know I listened to this record all the way through a bunch of times, but I would fixate on like the middle third. It's a weird like thirds record.
It is kind of
it doesn't really split in half. It's like there's those first four and the two bangers you really love in those first four, and then the second four and the two bangers you really. And I've just been all about that little third section. Maybe it's more of like, I don't know how many songs. It's probably more like 4 sections of.
Yeah, we got 17 songs. So
right. It's like a 4-4-4-4-4-4-5 kind of thing.
yes.
Oh, and there's 5. Look, I did that perfectly.
Hey.
Without even looking at the record, there's 5 tracks on the last side. So it's 4-4-4. So each of those sides feels like episodic to me. And it was cool. Like, it took me maybe a year into really loving that record and being convinced that it was not just a good record, but like something really rare. And I'm still convinced of that. I think it holds up with anything that's been made in the last 20, 30 years.
I would agree.
It's timeless. I think the songwriting is so understated, but is so brilliant and is so masterful. But yeah, it took me a while of like breaking it down to sides now seems so rational because each side has like little moments that I kind of deeply love and stay in.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what it is about it. Why it feels like not bifurcated, but multifurcated in that way.
Yeah, it's very intentionally laid out, it feels like. And maybe it's not, but it seems to me like, you know, if you're going to make a 17-song album, to have it have that kind of flow, it makes sense listening to it. Like, yeah, I want to dive into Baby Come On every now and then, or like Always on My Mind pops into my head pretty
Always on
often.
My Mind is the one that's the strangest to me because that's his little punk rock song. It's so linear. It reminds me, that's the one that reminds me the most of My Brain because it goes, that's the little hook. How and it takes a long time. He varies this tiny thing every phrase.
Yeah.
So that verse feels like so sick. He's got to repeat it. And then I know how it feels to go like, fuck that. So that song's like 4 or 5 parts and it never really ever Ouroboroses. It's a straight line, you know?
Yeah.
But each of those little parts, the always on my mind. Woo! Like,
yeah.
Every part's got its little like weirdo fucking thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I could get real granular about this stuff and I shouldn't.
I mean, please do.
I think the construction of these songs is brilliant. I mean, Always on My Mind is so structureless, but it's not. It's like I've always been obsessed with a certain kind of linear songwriting. Like The Devil of Mine is very much that.
Yeah.
That's like taking that idea really far, making songs feel more like a roller coaster or like a ride through a thing or like, you know, something that doesn't repeat, you know, Bob. I've been moving so far away from that, like verse melody, chorus melody, verse melody, repeat. I've been away from that for a long time. But I love how many ways on this record he varies that. I mean, what was the one you mentioned before? Always on My Mind?
Baby Come On.
Which reminds me of like Let's Go Out on the Town on his new record. It's ones that he just decides to be kind of like fucking little compact pop dude, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Which the new record does feel like, I was kind of saying like an album should be
like he wants to do that.
Like,
yeah.
Like this one felt like, you know, the artistic choice, and that one's just like, all right, I gotta sell some records. But it doesn't feel necessarily like, you know, like it's not genuine or something like that. Like it still feels
it just felt like he decided really consciously, like I was this weird like cowboy out of nowhere on this last thing, and this is gonna be a compact little pop record.
Yeah.
I think that's really cool. I mean, I wish so much I could just decide to make a little compact pop record. My brain is so diseased and so out there that they all end up being strange and whatever. But I love so many of the songs on this new one. And but it absolutely felt to me like a choice. And I guess I didn't think of it as a financial choice, but that says more about my brain. I just thought like,
well, maybe it's not financial, but you know what I mean?
You know what I mean? Like 75 minutes of like really barren kind of cowboy pop. I'm sure it would. It's like the thing you'd want to do next is like your 20-minute Buddy Holly pop record.
Right.
And
yeah.
He did a great job of it. It's incredible.
It's killer. And it fits so well just like when you're going through his discography, which isn't long. It's 3 records. So like you blare through it, but it all makes sense as like, in artists' work, where I feel like
And it
sometimes
makes sense to someone who's really plotting it, but in a good way, you know, is like conscious of his art. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I like the confidence it takes and the arrogance it takes to like worry about that part too. You know?
Yeah, for sure. I feel like at least for myself, I don't have that kind of self-control. Like if I have a thing I want to do for a record, like I'm just gonna do it, even if it's vastly different. Like I've got, you know, folk indie records, and then I did a couple of like instrumental ambient records, and like this next one's like a big orchestra record, and like
that's just because how you feel like of the day.
Yeah. Right, because I'm like, yeah, you know what? Like that's what I wrote, and that's what I heard.
I'm like that too, and he probably is too. He probably just knows how to. Some of it's just production choices too, you know.
Sure.
The song's a bit shorter, and it's a little like, a little brighter for sure.
Yeah, it's a little slicker and like maybe a little more dry as far as production goes.
Yeah,
like it's not as like drenched in reverb in the coolest way. But
yeah, I mean that second one, I'd much rather get back to you just saying stuff and me saying grunting, because I feel inadequate about music. But yeah, the second one, it does create. You realize how rare it is, especially now, for like worlds to be created within a record or something. That's something I've always tried really hard to do, with the varying degrees of success. But but with his. I think something I loved about it was like it did feel cinematic to me, and I think what I always mean by that when I'm talking about music is I feel like I'm in a world. Yeah. You know, it's like hearing a great soundtrack, or like something silly like the Chipmunk Adventure soundtrack. I loved it as a kid, and it felt like a world to me.
Yeah.
But this to me sounds like the coolest little 4-piece acoustic cowboy thing in the Capitol Chamber. You know?
It does.
It sounds like that to me, and it's like. It sounds like it could have been over one night. I could have sat in there and it happened, or 2 nights. You know, it felt like a place I could be, and a place I wanted to be. And so few records worry about that stuff. And that's like, I guess, what they say. You know, between the poetry between the notes and all this bullshit. It's like that's what it is. You know, I guess it's like I can see myself in that world with those people, with those feelings. It feels like part of what I come from or who I am on like a cellular level, you know?
Yeah.
And I relate to it real deeply in that way.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I do feel like you are pretty good at creating that as well. Like Soft Ache, when Soft Ache came out and this record was like the same time, it was like those 2 records and that album Shore by Fleet Foxes. I don't know if you ever listened to that one.
I think I have like a problem with that guy in that band. Like, I don't like his attitude. There's a couple people I've known or something, but no, neither here nor there. I don't know. I respect that they're making it, but I don't know it.
Sure. Yeah, no, so like those 3 records were like the sound of like the happy times of that year. And like, it very much is like, you know,
and that's like some bummer music to be soundtracking your time.
That's my life, my friend. That is my life. I'm all about the bummer tunes. But yeah, I just like, I don't know. It felt so perfect to be like in Los Angeles at that time, listening to those records. Like it brings you to that place. And those records, this Cutworms record included, still does that. Even though I'm back in LA now, like it feels appropriate whenever I pop it on.
Yeah. I mean, there's some spiritual LA in that Cutworms album. It's Laurel Canyon, and
definitely,
you know, there's certainly a lot of LA in the one I did that year. And I don't know the Fleet Foxes, but they probably live in LA, so that can't hurt.
I'm not sure where he lives actually, where that guy. But yeah, that album certainly feels like an LA record, especially compared to their other ones. But we don't need to get too into Fleet Foxes.
I just don't know it. I'd be flying very blind when it comes to the Fleet Foxes.
That's okay. I've nerded out about them on this podcast to other people. I won't subject.
I'm sure it's great. Yeah. I listen to Pink records all the time. You know, I don't have any taste. I mean, no, I think Pink's great.
Pink's got tunes.
She's got some real tunes. Yeah. I want to get going. Don't get me started on Pink, as I always say.
You always say that?
Yeah, just like every day.
Just always telling people, don't even get me started.
Yeah, just like the mailman, anybody.
Yeah.
No, I
Got a package for you.
I like the high and the low, and I don't like the high and the low like to like the high and the low. It's just I like whatever I like, you know. I don't really get into music as like a status symbol thing or a club. I never really related to music in that way, so I didn't have like band T-shirts or know what record labels were or something. It's just not a way it's not a way I experience music. I might be too self-absorbed. I just experience music how I like it or don't like it, you know?
I think that's completely valid. And I think that more people should like music just because they like the way it sounds instead of like, you know.
Yeah. That's kind of how I am with everything, but that's just because I care only about how something affects me, I guess.
Sure. Well, I mean, you know, if you're the one consuming the art, then I feel like you're the one that should make up your own opinion about it. So like, you know, if you want to listen to Pink, that's fine. Or you did, this is like a while ago, but it sticks in my mind because it was so funny to me, but it's a good example of this where you did like a live stream and you did Weezer covers. You did Weezer covers, but it was like only off of Ratitude and Hurley.
Yeah, I probably did that.
And I thought that was so funny. Like, what a choice.
I like the deep shit, you know. There's some stuff on Ratitude I like. I don't think it's a good record, but
I'm not.
I like, but
yeah, it's got like Runaway is on Hurley, and that's a decent song.
Yeah, there's that song. Oh God, no, I must not like Hurley because I can't think. Ratitude, I remember I hated The Girl Got Hot, but I did like. Oh, yeah. I like Your Daddy, even though now I don't think I thought it was catchy.
If you're wondering if I Want You To, that was one.
That one's okay. Yeah, I liked the one that Let It All Hang Out. Woo! Those girls.
Oh, sure.
That one, yeah.
Sure.
A few of those, but I think when I was younger, I started to share Weezer with my daughter because she was kind of a melody head, and I would start to like ones she liked. You know, I liked Pork and Beans and stuff.
Yeah,
really liked Pork and Beans. She has good taste, so she doesn't like really bad stuff. So she would never listen. Like if we were all on drugs or whatever, she'd turn off. If half the stuff on like the Red album was on, she doesn't like songs that are bad, even being a kid.
Yeah,
but if it all hang out, she loves that shit. You know,
that's so funny. That's so funny. Yeah. I mean, and like, it's a little funny too. This will loop back to Cutworms, I swear. But we were talking about like, like that structureless kind of thing you were describing before.
Like a linear kind of movement rather than something that's more like Ouroboros or something.
Right, yeah. Which is like the anti Rivers Cuomo, like where he was doing like the Green album or something like that, where it's all the same.
But then he does The Greatest Man That Ever Lived, which is exactly like Always on My Mind.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. Yeah.
There's a very strange songwriter mind that's obsessed with that kind of linear songwriting, and I don't know what it is, but we all seem to go down that lane every now and then, even though we must know that's not like gonna make us money or something.
Sure. Yeah. There is that, right? Like there's songs that like. There's no defined chorus or something like that, but it just feels right. Like it just moves in a way that makes so much sense.
And even something like Happiness is a Warm Gun is almost like, it's almost like a fortress song. It's not a ladder to a fortress, like is what we're talking about with Always on My Mind or The Devil or The Greatest Man That Ever Lived. That's a ladder up a fortress. Happiness is a Warm Gun is my favorite kind of song, which is like a little cube of things, a kind of a pre-chorus and kind of a chorus, and then a steeple. That's the real fucking thing.
Yeah.
And so that's what we all should be aspiring to, is these weird like cathedral songs that are more aren't shaped like a ladder, that are shaped more like a cathedral, I think.
I love that. Yeah, no, that's totally.
I have to think about other songs that do. I mean, I guess like Bohemian Rhapsody, of course. Bohemian Rhapsody isn't these compact patterns like Happiness and then a shoot off. It's kind of a ladder that then becomes a fireworks show.
Yeah. Hey, there we go.
Anyway, that's all I got on that.
The one that came to my mind was Band on the Run.
Oh, totally.
Where it's like,
that's Happiness is a Warm Gun.
yeah, it truly is very similar. I don't know if George really has something like that, but
who?
George, like if
I
we're
don't
talking,
think he thought that way.
he was very formulaic, I think.
And I love those George songs. I mean, I'm a cliche kind of dude that thinks that George record's the best of the solo stuff for sure. I'm a living in the material world head kind of too.
Me too. I love that.
But the gnarliest he ever got structurally. I'm going to sound like an idiot because I could pull out a record and know I'm wrong, but to me, it's something like Be Here Now, which I love, but it's more like this meditation in how it's structured. And that might be my favorite song you ever wrote.
That's a great song.
It is, but that seems maybe more out of like meditation or something than it is out of like being kind of like a structural anarchist, which I think John was in the anarchist structurally because that's probably how he saw himself or how he wanted to be. Paul was a structural anarchist when he was trying to be John or get John's attention or something.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
But George was like confident in himself,
Yeah.
And his songs don't sound like any of their songs, I don't think.
No, definitely not. They all are very, I feel, distinct. And
it's like the Bulls. Like there's no teams like that anymore, for sure. The teams with just
preach
specialists.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, no, there's not. They were really. That's such a good comparison. They were like the 90s Bulls.
You could keep the best 4 or 5 people together, and they were happy. Or happy until they weren't.
Right.
I mean, you think now the bands, if you just condense the bands we had and combined, 2 or 3 songwriters who were jealous of each other, we'd have incredible fucking songwriting happening,
Yeah, absolutely. Until one of them goes to Vegas for the weekend and
that's it. But then you get your Big Star Sister Lovers record out of that,
Oh, sure, yeah.
What we have now in co-writing is so much more like conveyor belt shit. It's artists getting in a room to write the Chappelle Roan single or the Olivia Rodrigo single. And you know how much I like those things.
Oh, yeah.
But it's so much less like it's stripping all the stuff that made the Beatles interesting, which was like their competitive nature with each other, the love and hate pull. You're separating all that and just creating a product, And that's where we've lost a lot of that stuff, I think, is like bands with multiple songwriters. Fleetwood Mac being probably the most famous example where you feel the tension in between the notes. And
God.
But we probably do have some of that. I don't want to sound like an old man. I just don't hear as much of it, I hear the product, but I don't hear the like interpersonal stuff.
Yeah, it's not as popular, I think. And
yeah,
I feel like I realized this year, and again, this could be me just being completely out of touch. But like I was going through like my favorite records of the year, and I realized like almost none of them are bands anymore. It's like a single songwriter. And it's weird to think about.
Part of it might be economics, part of it might just be how much easier it is to sound really great by yourself in your room with a computer. When I was younger, everything you recorded in your room was by nature a blueprint because you only had access to so high quality a thing. I mean, I'm trying to think of like, before we get back to what we're supposed to be talking about, there's one band that I don't always love the songwriting, but that band, the female fronted band, Adrian,
Big Thief.
Big Thief. That's a band where I'm not kind of a nut about them. But that's a band where I can hear their interpersonal tension when I hear their records.
Certainly.
Not even tension implying that I know them or that they get along or don't get along, but I can hear what's happening between them on those records. And the thing I liked the most when I was given those records, it didn't teach me like a bunch of songwriting stuff necessarily, which says more about me than it does about them. But it did reinform, like, I hear a band, like all their shit together.
Yeah.
And like, maybe it's a construct, but it feels very real to me and tangible. I don't hear that when I hear a Weezer record. I don't hear a band working out their stuff. But when I hear those Big Thief records, I do hear like 4 or 5, however many people are in that band, like working out their shit together.
Yeah.
Which I find moving. I like that kind of stuff,
Yeah, definitely. And like Adrian's records are fantastic on her own. And
I don't know those at all, I don't think.
Oh, they're very good. Same with Buck Meek is another guy who's in that band. I think they were actually married and then they got divorced and they're still in the band.
So it's like Fleetwood Mac.
It is. Yeah. It's funny that you brought that up because it's very true. I think they do get along a lot better than Lindsay and Stevie, but
not too.
But yeah, like both of them make great solo records, but when they come together as Big Thief, like they're...
Do you feel the absence of the other when they're making solo records?
I mean, like, yes, not necessarily in like a bad way, but like there is a stark difference.
Yeah. That's beautiful. That's the best argument for bands existing that's ever been uttered, you know? There's a difference when one person isn't there that didn't write the song necessarily.
Right.
Love that. I've never really been in a band like, I mean, I guess I have here and there, but I find that stuff super romantic. And in another life, I'd love to be in a band like that where I was just one of 3 or 4 equally kind of contributive people.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Cutworms isn't like that at all either. We've gone away from that.
I do want to bring it back to Cutworms, but I did have a question, like in my notes, that's a little bit related to what we were talking about. And that is that I did think of All Things Must Pass era George when I was listening to this record.
Yeah.
And that made me want to ask you the question, are you more of a George guy or do you have a favorite of the Beatles?
I'm a John guy, but when it comes to the solo stuff, I'm a George guy for the solo stuff, except for like, I'm as guilty as anybody of like deeply loving the mythology of the Plastic Ono record and
yes,
and loving that record so intensely, even though I know it's not the best songs he ever wrote, but somehow I don't care. It's like there's something about it that transcends, like, you know, good or bad songwriting. But I think I'm a John guy, you know.
Sure. Oh yeah, that's great. I wanted to know. And then you said something that I thought was funny, but also like very interesting when you suggested that you wanted to talk about this record, and you said that it's the only masterpiece you could think of that you didn't make in this decade. Do you still do you still feel like that's true?
Yeah. You know, I have like a low opinion of myself, but I don't really have a low opinion of what I do, kind of.
Preach, like, man. Amen.
I mean, I don't know. I love, you know, not everything, but like Soft Take, that's the best record I know how to make. And I like listening to that record more than I like listening to 99% of records. So, you know, I like listening to his a little better.
Sure.
But almost nobody else. So, yeah, I'm being silly, but I don't think anyone's writing songs like I am, so I don't know how to judge it. And I don't, and no one's definitely writing songs like he is.
Sure.
It's like I prefer all music to be like that. Yeah. I wish, you know, everybody was so. I'm not even saying it as a compliment to myself. I know it's been a detriment financially. I know it's. Certain people probably don't like it but it's so much like me. It couldn't come from anybody else. I don't think any of my songs, you know. And again, that I'm not giving myself a compliment. I'm like, sometimes I'm mortified by that. Sometimes it makes me feel like deeply strange or unhappy or something. But I know enough about the world and I have enough objectivity to know no one's ever made a record like that.
Yeah.
And when I heard his, like you said, you know, we have, of course, little moments of George or little moments of things, but I just remember thinking no one's ever made a record like this, you know, and, you know, it's so rare to find no one's ever made a fill in the blank like anything, but to say no one's ever made a fill in the blank like anything that feels this dear to me. Yeah. It's really hard. It's like soulmate shit, you know, like this.
Yeah.
This record is so dear to me because it feels so rare anyway, and then for me to feel so grateful to it, like love it so much, you know, like, you know, I don't know, I love falling in love with art like that, because for me it's like it's just as rare as like meeting someone you want to be with the rest of your life. It's like I watch movies constantly, but I only really love one like once every few years. I mean, it's hard. You know,
Yeah.
you cycle through this shit when you're a maniac because you want to fall in love, and sometimes it takes 3 years. And it's just like album making. It's like you make one every 2 years to fall in love, and at the end of your life or in the middle of your career, you do look back and go, man, it's kind of fucked up that like only 3 of them were like, if I'm really on my shit, were like the double truth, you know?
Mm.
And that's like all relative, because who am I to judge it? But I know what I think. It's like, I like to hear Paul Schrader say what his 4 best films are. I don't think he's being a prick when he does that. I'm curious what he thinks about his work, you know?
Yeah.
So when I say that or something, it's more from like, I like to hear that from other people. I don't consider that rude or anything. I might disagree with Paul Schrader, but it's fascinating to me to know the 4 in a 60-year career that he considers the only 4 that matter or whatever.
Sure.
You know?
Well, I mean, that begs the question, what are your 4 that you feel are the ones that matter?
Soft Take first.
Mm-hmm.
Lemon Cotton Candy, Ghost Electricity, and Slingshot, whatever you imagine either of those versions of it to be.
Sure.
Or that, like, if you had to erase everything else I'd made, I'd keep those 4.
Interesting. Yeah.
But it's hard. I mean, I like Spook Workers as much as I like anything. I like that songbook thing as much as I like anything.
Yeah.
There's times where I can listen to some of that Margot stuff and like it. I don't really go back to that, really. But no, at the end of my life, it's like if all I did was Soft Take, Lemon, Ghost, and then Slingshot, like that's pretty good for me, I think.
I mean, that's a hell of a run.
I think so. God damn, not everybody might agree, but I think so.
Yeah, I mean, I remember a little bit of a backstory. So and maybe you'll think this is actually pretty funny. Like the way that I discovered your music was I used to get Best Buy gift cards all the time when I was growing up, for like my birthday and stuff like that. And I had $5 left, and I went into Best Buy.
They marked ours down too.
And there was a display. There was a display with a big tag. It was just like $5. I'm like, well, that's what I got. And I liked the artwork, and it was not animal.
That's
and so,
super.
Yeah, and I picked it up and I put it in the car, and my friend was with me, and we were like, all right, well, let's see what this is. And we didn't say a word the entire time. We were just like, holy shit, this is fucking incredible. And and we like became obsessed with it. And then like I followed your music pretty closely from that point on. And so when Slingshot to Heaven came out, like it was kind of another one of those moments, and kind of what you're talking about with like Cut Worms, where it was like, I feel like there's an album like that once every few years where it's just like the world stops for a minute when you're listening to that for the first time, and you're like, holy shit. And it sounds like that's kind of your experience with this Cut Worms album a little bit.
It is, but that was also my experience with that Slingshot record. So it's like, I mean, even when I was making it, I knew the same thing you're saying. You felt like it's so weird how that lines up, and it's also so beautiful and weird that you picked up. I don't know, man. I'm a little bit of a Luddite. The fact that some kid had $5 left and discovered some little piece of silly culture that affected the next decade of his life in some small way. I'm a sucker for that stuff, and I just worry so much with my daughter and everybody that we're losing it, and like how we transfer like that kind of stuff through physical objects. But anyway, yeah, that is how I felt when I heard the Cut Worms album. It felt like the only analogy I'll give to it is like I'm one of those people that likes to see like the really good sport players win titles. I don't find like the Barkley never won shit interesting or fun.
Sure.
Like, he was great. He should have. Fuck off.
Yeah.
So I like
on the dream team.
Yeah, I like it when the good ones get a ring, as long as I don't think they're shitty people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like that. So I felt that way with that record, where I was like, man, this kid whose demos I loved and whose first record I really loved, this motherfucker just like straight up dropped a little masterpiece,
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's you feel like you're cheering for like the home team when that happens. It's like, I don't care if I know this dude or he knows me or he likes my shit or anything. Something about this kid is what I want this world to be more about,
Yeah.
And when he makes something great, I celebrate it. I feel so happy. It's like, it really is. I keep talking about falling in love, but it's like my experience with art is so much more like that. It's like, I get those feelings of like first love, or like seeing someone you love do something that makes you super proud. And I was like, this little fucker whose demos I used to get just made a fucking like masterpiece, you know, something that'll live forever. And good for him. And I hope he's happy, you know, that he did it.
Yeah, absolutely.
With that record, if you boil down like the great loves of your life, you know, for me, let's say we go macro and just say like art, you know, but take my child aside, which is a given, of course. Art, you know, art, creativity, film, music, literature, comb it down. The last thing you get to for me is melody. Like that was probably the great love of my life. Like I fell in love with melody, like people fall, like Romeo and Juliet style. I fell in love with melody to where like I would die for melody. So when I hear another kid who seems so passionate about the love of my life, it's like, how could I not love that shit? It's like, that's a very, very small connection. Like, I love melody more than anything. Anybody that loves it anywhere close to as much as I love it is my brother, you know?
Yeah, like, I'm right there with you.
Tribe from the swamp, you know?
Yes, absolutely. I'm such a sucker when it comes to melody. I think that's why I like Randy Newman so much. It's like nobody writes a melody better than Randy Newman.
It's tough.
Yeah.
Melody's a language, you know, people don't understand that. We've come a long, I'll leave it at this. We've come a long way in film criticism. There's a whole grammar. We know what shots mean. We know that editing is, you know, its own language and grammar. We're bad at that with music. You know, we really are. I mean, there's musicology, but we're bad about talking that because we're tribal. We like the bands that make us feel seen or fit in. But someone's going to get serious about discussing musical grammar, and melody is its own language. And what I love about Cutworms and this kid's musical creative project is he seems to take the language and melody like life or death, you know, as seriously as you're supposed to take grammar and language and culture. Like, melody is its own language. It makes you feel things no matter what the lyric under that melody is, because it's a language. We don't understand how birds are speaking. We don't understand what melody is, but it's a language, you know? And I love people that like that language a lot.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Richard. And on that note, yeah, we'll call it. Thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks. Thanks for having me blabber.